So this unfortunate chap here about to get his brains splattered all over the floor is Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who in 1170 was brutally assassinated, sending shockwaves all across Europe. At a young age, Becket befriended all the right people, and now in 1155, at the age of 35, he was Lord Chancellor for King Henry II of England, a match made in the opposite of heaven. He served the king excellently for the next few years, grabbing the role of Chancellor and making it his own. However, in 1161, the Archbishop of Canterbury passed away, and now it was prime time medieval drama time. Henry said his boy Becket should be made Archbishop, hoping he would put the king first in his Chancellor role and then the Archbishop's role second. A bad assumption to make, but Becket was at first hesitant as he had had to juggle two very important roles, but he eventually accepted in 1162. Becket was now a man of the church, and the only person above him was God. Poor old Henry had little influence over his friend, who soon resigned his role as Chancellor, and the rift between the two started forming as they disagreed on church matters, which I won't bore you with here. In 1164, Big Tom fled to France as Henry tried to deal with these boisterous churchgoers, and he took refuge with Henry's arch-nemesis, King Louis VII of France, who didn't really like Henry as he married his ex-wife Eleanor of Aquitaine and held more lands in France than the French king, and a chance to get one up over the English king was too good to turn down. Henry did try his best to get his mate back to England with numerous letters to the French king and the Pope, and Big Tom did try to resign his archbishopry, but the Pope said, "Nah mate, this is great drama." In 1170, Henry crowned his oldest son, also called Henry, co-king with the Archbishop of York's blessing. However, this was absolutely disgusting, as the right for crowning English kings was reserved for the Archbishop of Canterbury, so Becket excommunicated them all so they would all go to hell. Tommy Boy had returned to England at this point, and upon hearing of his doings, Henry uttered the words of something in similar nature to, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Whatever Henry may have said, four knights fancied a bit of killing, and they confronted Becket at Canterbury Cathedral on the 29th of December 1170. They entered to find Becket and told him to go to the king to explain himself, which was obviously refused, so the knights left and came back in 5 minutes later with the weapons they had placed outside under a tree. They found Becket and tried to drag him outside, as killing someone in a holy place would be extremely unholy. However, Becket held onto a pillar, accepting his death, and not even a minute later, his body was brutally massacred and his brains spewed across the cathedral floor. Becket's death stunned Europe, and he was made a martyr less than 3 years later, with Henry agreeing to go on crusade to appease the Pope, which he never did, as well as the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland, which the Pope was also keen on, and it was a subsequent catalyst for long-standing tensions within the British Isles. So one thing about the world of medieval crime and punishment is how savage some of their punishments were. With no police force and few prisons, they had to use harsh deterrents to try and stop criminals breaking the law in future. While some sentences were dealt with in a swift manner, like this chap here about to get his head lopped off, others were left up to the judgment of God in 3 trials by ordeal, ordeal by fire, water and combat. Ordeal by water saw a subject have their hands and feet tied together and then chucked in a body of water which had supposedly been blessed and purified. If they sank, it meant that this holy water had accepted them. However, if they floated, they were thus guilty. However, some strong swimmers amongst you might have realised you could dramatically increase your chances of being found innocent if you exhale before being submersed, with ordeal by water having an innocent rate of over 60%. Ordeal by fire saw the accused carry a boiling rod over a few metres in length and then had their hand bound for around 3 days, and when the bandages were removed after 3 days, if the wound was healing, they were deemed innocent and judged by God to be a good person. However, if the wound was infected, they were deemed guilty. Ordeal by combat, though, was by far the most popular choice for people, as the accused and the accuser would often go out in a bludgeoning and wrestling match, only given a blunt wooden staff. One contemporary account commented that you should have a good set of teeth going into a trial by combat, as the weapons you were given were blunt and you had to find creative solutions in order to maim your opponents. The use of champions was usually limited to men of the church who were forbidden to shed blood under their oaths, and the ordeals were released by trial by jury in around 1219 AD. So while humans have done some pretty horrific stuff to each other during times of war, the first recorded case of someone being put on trial for war crimes was in 1474 for a man named Peter von Hagenbach who'd done some pretty horrific stuff. so a bit of viewer discretion advised for this one. In 1469, the Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold, also known as Charles the Terrible, acquired this region here in the Alsace region, as the Duke of Austria had mortgaged it to him and he needed an effective ruler. It could bring in vast tax revenues, enhance Charles's reputation as a duke, as well as act as a buffer state for the surrounding duchies if it was ruled well. Or if the region was ruled poorly, he would piss off his local neighbours, resulting in the Burgundians being pincered from all sides if war broke out, with the French here, the Holy Roman Empire up here, and the Swiss down here. So Charles chose his loyal dog, Peter von Hagenbach, to rule the region, who would follow his orders to a T. Peter absolutely terrorised the local population, sentencing people to death for the slightest discontent in his rule, especially against the high taxation, and his soldiers abusing people in their own homes, as well as committing some pretty horrific acts of sexual violence. His opponents were scalped, people's heads were nailed to houses, as well as his own wife's pubic hair being added to an evening meal. His biggest mistake though was attacking peaceful Swiss merchants who were travelling the region, and now by 1474 the local neighbouring regions entered into alliance to stop his reign of terror, and he knew his end was pretty much near, so he holed up in the fortified town of Breisach. Rumour has it he was going to expel the citizens and drown them in the Rhine, so fast action was required by the Alliance to stop this. However, in the end, it was his own men who mutinied against him, captured him and put him in prison. He was tortured for a few days and interrogated about his own rule, as well as the territorial ambitions of Charles the Bold, and he was only saved a direct execution as the Duke of Austria, who he was a prisoner of, said he was entitled to a trial, which was common with the legal proceedings at the time. 28 men from the neighbouring regions gathered to judge him, with his indictments being murder of citizens without judgment, conspiracy to commit murder, grape, which included nuns as well, and violation of his oaths to uphold the laws of Breisach. He was also being tried on the violations his own soldiers committed as well, and he and his attorneys defended it by saying he was only following orders from his duke, and that his duke alone could be the only one to try him for these crimes. It seems these arguments were almost persuasive enough to get Hagenbach off, as one attorney said that they should withdraw the charges and let the Duke try him. However, with more witnesses and a new attorney, he was soon found guilty and sentenced to death. He was actually given a say on how he should be executed, with him saying, "Have pity on me and execute me with the sword," with the privilege of executing this absolutely horrendous man being vied for by 7 men across the local region. He had to be carried to the market square in a wheelbarrow due to how mutilated his body already was from the torture, and on May the 9th, 1474, many people were happy to see the end of this chap with one swing of the sword. The trial was the first known case of prosecution for command principle, where the commander is directly responsible for the actions of his subordinates, as well as the first prosecution for gender-related targeted crimes. So history is full of strange moments, and none more so than in May 1170 during the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland, where an immensely outnumbered group of Englishmen defeated the Irish with the help of a bunch of cows. The invading force consisted of less than 100 men, including only 10 knights and the rest archers, and they were led by this chap here, Raymond Fitzgerald, who was also known as Raymond the Large or Raymond the Fat. They had embarked at Baginbun Head at the south of Ireland, which looks like this, and they were spearheading the English invasion, so began building a promontory fort, which was built on a steep cliffside, so in case of assault, the back 3 sides would be defended by the steep drop, and you only had to worry about the front. The surrounding area was rich with cows that could provide valuable supplies for Raymond and his troops. However, he probably didn't expect them to lead the vanguard of his army. The lookout spotted an angry Irish force headed towards them, roughly believed to be in the region of around 3,000 men who were ready to butcher the foreign invaders, and now Raymond had to hole up in his makeshift fortification that was mostly made of earthworks, but looking around, he had more cows inside than he did fighting men. Our mad lad Raymond lets the Irish come straight up to his gates and then just opens them. Hundreds of angry cows, who were being whipped from behind by the English to stir them into a frenzy, now come charging out of the gates, causing chaos amongst the Irish ranks as they try and fumble around everywhere so they wouldn't get trampled to death. As the cows cause carnage, breaking the Irish ranks and pushing them off the cliff sides, Raymond now charges his force out of his little fort and savagely slaughters anyone who is still left alive. Prisoners are taken and dragged back behind the earthworks, however they're not spared as their limbs are brutally broken. They're then decapitated and thrown off the cliffside. The person wielding the axe was apparently a lady by the name of Alice of Abergavenny, who lost her lover in the fight and wanted revenge on these Irish. Accounts state around 1,000 Irish perished in the fight, and the victory allowed King Henry II of England to gain a foothold in Ireland, expanding his vast Angevin empire, which spread from Hadrian's Wall all the way down to the Pyrenees. So what do the fork, the crossbow, and the cat all have in common? Well, according to the medieval Catholic Church, all three of them are work of the devil and should have been banned from existence. The fork was introduced to Europe in the late 10th century from trade routes to the east, and Italy was the first to take up the trend, with it becoming commonplace in the upper class by the 14th century. Northern Europe though saw the fork as the unmanly utensil of the Italians, and Roman Catholic writers said that God had already provided us fingers to eat our food with, and it would be an excessive delicacy to use the fork and blasphemous against the word of the Lord. By the 18th century though, the fork had been welcomed into every home with open arms, probably due to how effective it was in saving your hands getting messy. The crossbow saw its ban in April 1139 when the Catholic Church held a council of over 1,000 members to deal with the conflicts that had arisen due to the last pope being labelled as an anti-pope and religious morals were severely lacking. Rule 29 of the meeting stated, "We prohibit under anathema that murderous art of crossbowmen and archers, which is hateful to God, to be employed against Christians and Catholics from now on." However, from how effective these weapons were on the battlefield, no one really cared on how banned they were, and still used them anyway. But the ruling is a little bit hazy, so it's not sure what the ban completely entailed. And finally, the best of the lot, Pope Gregory IX's war on cats, as he believed they were being worshipped during satanic initiation ceremonies, which some heretics revealed under the confession of torture, which is known to be quite a reliable source of information. In an official papal bull in 1233, cats, especially black cats, were said to be the work of the devil and they should be rid from this world. The Pope's catcalling led to some debate on whether the lack of cats caused rats to run rampant and spread the Black Death roughly a century later. However, there's no evidence on how many cats were disposed of or how long the culling went on for, and even in cat-loving countries such as Egypt, the plague still ran rampant.